Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take on a Tuesday morning for Market Rebellion. And wow, did we have about as crazy a day as you've ever seen in the markets yesterday? I know that we've seen a lot of crazy markets, but yesterday when we looked at the market, when we came in long before the opening bell, we were down about 1,000 points. As we got closer and closer to the opening bell, things started to improve at least a little bit. And so we opened down about 700 points, give or take. By the time we got to the closing bell, things completely had flipped around and everything had changed. And it was just an amazing turn in the markets that we had yesterday, considering just how negative things looked over the weekend going into the Monday morning. And then certainly this big turnaround throughout the trading day was just spectacular to watch. And we might have something to talk about in a second about today, but sticking with yesterday just for a moment. What I think was just amazing was where did we see some of those turns? Well, the same names that were leading us to the downside, and you know all those names. When we're on a negative move and we're really pushing to the downside, it's going to be airlines, it's going to be travel and leisure, it's going to be all of that, and obviously encompassing the cruise ships and all the rest. But it's also industrials, it's also financials. Well, where did we start to see that turn? It was in industrials and some of these financials. Look at the industrial turn that we had yesterday. At the lows yesterday, Boeing was trading 175. It flew all the way up to 191. This is a big company and a huge turnaround yesterday from the highs to the lows, or lows to the highs rather. Raytheon 62 to 67. You get the idea. Just a complete turnaround in the markets, absolutely powered across all different areas. And it just really was something spectacular. Now, in terms of some of the leadership yesterday, well, Zoom, Tesla, Netflix, some of the gaming stocks, EA Sports, across the board, Take-Two Interactive. Those kind of names started off stronger because those are the names that people oftentimes have gone to when we've talked about COVID and being sequestered and all the rest of that type of thing, and people not wanting to move around as much. Well, they did hold on to a lot of their gains, but it was the big turnaround that was really something spectacular. And on the tech side, you look at a name like Facebook yesterday. Well, 224 to 233. Not a gigantic move, but a pretty nice move from the lows up to the highs. Apple 232 up to 332 up to 344. That's a pretty nice move. Amazon, when you go from the lows to the highs, nearly an 80-point move to the upside. So you get the idea of just how much of a turn the markets were really making. And as they made those turns, we went from a volatility index that actually was well up into the 40s, the low 40s at least, and finished the day closer to 34. That's an amazing move as well. We talk about volatility being volatile. That's a great example of that. We've seen that on the move to the upside, and now yesterday, great example of that to the downside, where the markets, while they were down in those huge numbers, the volatility was certainly spiking to the upside, and that air came out very, very rapidly. And I'll tell you, the volumes just continue to be something that are absolutely extraordinary. Yesterday, a little bit slower. And when I say a little bit slower, in any other marketplace, these would be a huge number, but we slowed down to just a little over 31 million contracts yesterday. So for the month of June, we are averaging just under 35 million contracts per day. Contrast that with the best year we've ever had in the markets in terms of the derivative markets, in terms of volume, was about 20 million per day. We're averaging just under 35 million per day in the month of June. And well over 28.5 million per day for the year. So amazing numbers. Volatility today is sort of coming in a little bit because when we got here, the markets were screaming to the upside today, and they just extended that move throughout the pre-market. And then we opened up the market. We're up well over 3% on the Dow, about 2.5% or a little bit better on the S&P, just under 2%, a little less than 2% on the NASDAQ. We were really rolling. And then suddenly, as we get into the first hour of trade, gave back a little bit of that. Like we made back a lot of what was down in the first hour or two or three yesterday. Well, we're seeing a little bit of that give back in the first hour or so today. So in the first hour, you look over at the Dow, which was up 3.25%, now up about 2.25%. You look at the S&P, up about 2%. It was up about 0.5% more than that. NASDAQ still hanging around about the same spot where it was, maybe a little bit lower, but not significantly. So leadership roles today. Well, take a look. Industrials, Boeing, Sound familiar? Up about 7.6%. Then you get Dow, you get Caterpillar, you get Raytheon, all of those up either close to 5% or more than 5%. Pretty nice move to the upside. You look at the XLI itself, the industrial ETF, and you're looking at about a 4% move to the upside. Then we started some of these givebacks. Financials, by the way, have just been a really impressive move to the upside. Yesterday, some of that violent move, really the financials were contributing. Today, financials once again contributing. It's Citi, it's Wells Fargo, it's Bank of America, it's American Express. Those names continue to be names that are leadership names when it comes to the financials. I didn't mention Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. They were trading well, they were trading positive, but not as strong as the others, at least while we were looking right before I came on air. Things change within 5 or 10 minutes. It's unbelievable. Matter of fact, when we started this, I looked over at the market, glanced over at the markets on the TV over there. I'm seeing Jerome Powell. We were barely up 170 points or something like that. Now we're up 370 points. Gives you a little idea. In just a couple of minutes, we jumped 200 points. So that's pretty amazing, really, quite frankly. Now, there's been some incredible option activity today already, and some of it in some of these areas where people are finding so much to trade. And I would just caution people that you have to be definitely disciplined, and you have to understand some of the risks that are involved in a lot of these names, because people are playing a lot of momentum right now. And I think you're seeing algorithms jumping in and being a part of the movements that we're seeing as well. Not so much on the volume side, but in terms of some of these violent moves, both up and down, these are a lot of algorithmic trading. As a matter of fact, I should point out that when we were up, call it 1,000 points or close to it, I think a lot of that is algorithmic based upon specifics that people are looking at. And there are so many different ways that they're programmed, but we are seeing that. So it is not just a downside trade. It's also to the upside. I still am a big person who is pushing back against the algorithmic trading, just because I think that I've always said this. I want market makers. I don't want these market takers and give these exaggerated moves that we see day in and day out. And we've seen it for a very long period of time. It's just not my thing, but a lot of people just continue to still think it's an all right deal to have these algorithms pushing markets down to the downside, shaking people out and to the upside, and with some of the advantages and the pipes and all the rest of it. I'm just not a big believer in that. Now, hadn't really talked about healthcare a lot in the last couple of the takes that we put on here. So I will just touch on this for a moment. So we have seen some interesting markets when we talk about the biotechs, as well as the big pharma names, as well as the United Healths and those types of things. Eli Lilly today, definitely a standout. And I don't see a lot of coverage on this, but stock is up 13% today. This is Eli Lilly. This is not a company that normally moves in those kind of big gap type jumps. And it did today for the fact that they have positive results for their breast cancer therapy. So that's one that really stood out for me. You know, we talk about a lot of these names, and Merck and Pfizer and all the rest of it. Eli Lilly, another one of those great names, but that's a big move. And I think that should be something that should be highlighted, because I don't see that getting covered a lot today. And I think that's pretty big news, given the idea that we've seen so much in the healthcare field, and not all of it's going to be focused, obviously, on coronavirus. There are all these pipelines, and this being a part of that whole process. So keep an eye on Lilly. That one's pretty interesting. Incredible paper today in American Airlines. I talked about that a little bit, but that's not the unusual. The unusual for today is going to be Juniper. Now, we don't talk about this name a whole lot either. And this is one of the names, and it reminds me of the days where there was Intel and AMD, there's Cisco, and there's Juniper. So Juniper does not get as much chatter and as much conversation on television or anywhere else. But today we're seeing something that I think definitely stuck out for me. So a buyer of 7,500 of the July, expiring on the 10th of July, the July 10th, 25.5 calls. So about $1 out of the money. Stock trading about 24.25 right now. They're paying between 40 and 90 cents. Obviously, they started at 40, it kind of moved up to 90, pulled back a little bit. So a little ballpark that and say somewhere around 60 cents on an average price for the 7,500 that were bought there. It's a pretty interesting trade. This is a stock that doesn't, like I say, get talked about a lot, but it can move, and it can move very briskly as well. And when you look at the field right now, we talk about technology all the time. We talk about all the different inner works with the SMH in terms of all the chips that go into the big data and all of the rest of that. We don't oftentimes focus on this portion of technology, but I will tell you, continues to be extremely busy. So this could be something that I think would be very interesting, and I'll be looking at this a lot closer after the take. Wanted to get this up early. We are about 90 minutes into the trading session right now. I'll give you a really quick update, and then we're going to close her up. VIX trading just under 35. S&P up a little over 1%. NASDAQ up over a little 1%. Dow up over just a little over 1%. So we have adjusted. We're a little under 300 points on the Dow right now. Pretty strong. Powell testimony seems to be having some effects, at least on the markets. And certainly because when he first came on there, I think we were up in the 700-ish sort of area, 650, 700. We've been pulling back a little bit. So I think some of the interpretation of what's being spoken right now with the chairman on television certainly having at least some effects on the market itself. Guys, have a great day of trading. Be educated. Knowledge is certainly king. It absolutely is. If you can understand these derivative markets and have a better understanding and get educated, this is an incredible place to be right now. It has been for a very long period of time, but the growth just continues. I talk about the volumes each and every day. The volumes continue to grow each and every day. Have a great day of trading.